First thing I want to do is I want to say to everyone in this room, thank you so very much for this conference. It's timely, it's useful, it's dynamic, and it's a tough damn job. Because I've been around the block a couple days, and I have to keep everything into perspective, and I think it's important for us in the room to understand perspective, because that's part of what we're going to talk about today. How many in this room own a pet? Very good. Today in the United States, there's something in the neighborhood of 82 million homes with a pet. Now it gets more complicated. How many of you own a cat? Okay, good. 39.4 million of the homes in the United States own a cat. Here's the perspective. This year, in the United States, if I was the CEO of the kitty litter business, I would sell $1.8 billion of kitty litter. Why does that matter? Because if you put our good friends from Pfizer, where's Pfizer here? If you put Pfizer's cattle business together with Merck's cattle business, with Elanco's cattle business, with BI's cattle business, we'd be at 1.2 billion. So here's the perspective. If you're in the kitty litter business, your future is brighter than the cattle business. Is that causal? I doubt it. But I like to remember that all of us in this room are in agriculture or some dimension of that. And as we sort of look to the future, it's probably not going to be business as usual. Because business as usual doesn't keep up with the consumer issues. One other thing that's going to be an overriding theme in this presentation. There was a time in my life when I worked for companies or in practice, and if I did three things well, I was a very successful veterinarian. If I grew the animals fast and efficient, if I kept them healthy in the process, and if I took care of the customers that owned the animals and the solutions they needed, I made a lot of money and was very successful. That was enough. But now we're in the middle of the fourth leg of a very complicated stool. Consumer trust. It's getting complicated. It's not good enough to grow them fast and efficient anymore. Because if you're buying food, you not only want to have quality, but you want to have information, and you want to make a decision that fits your psychology. That's getting complicated. We've heard for several days, I guess a couple now, about the fact that resistance is complicated. Yet again, another piece for that evidence. For those of you that can't read that, I'll sum it up. Bacteria have a social structure, and the social structure is designed so that the species survives come hell or high water. And it's independent of everything else that goes on. And there's a whole bunch of scientists that are proving once again this whole resistance stuff has been around a lot longer than Homo sapiens. Okay. And we are sort of in this century, and we're sort of mucking it up, and now we got to fix it. So what are we going to do next? It's complicated because in the world today, on a yearly basis, between 50 and 60 million people are added to the I want protein crowd. Because when you move out of poverty into middle class, the very first thing you spend the extra dollar on is a higher quality piece of protein. That's good news for everybody in the room, but it also puts economic pressure on a whole bunch of us as well, because we still got to produce more. I've had the great joy in this profession of now doing veterinary medicine in over 40 countries. It's a big, beautiful world out there. And they have the same issues in Suharto, Indonesia, as they do here. Actually, Surabaya, it's Jakarta. I get them confused. My point to this audience is, this is a big, complicated question. These 2 days is only one step in a very tall ladder. But I admire everyone sort of headed there. And it is a debate. Why is it a debate? If you're in the journalism business and you want to sell tomorrow's edition, is it better to talk about the good things in life or about the villains? It's all about the villains, folks. Villains sell. And we're all, excuse my French, we're all pissed because we're suddenly villains. Our daddy taught us that if we were in agriculture, we had a halo around our head. Everything we did every day was good. We're good people. We have noble activities. And now we got some people that are telling us we're villains. We're doing bad stuff. And it pisses us off. As it should. The antibiotic issue is just another one of the issues that we have to sort of sort out. And there's going to be a whole bunch of folks in this process that are going to be parochial about their needs, and they're going to look like they're once again our enemy. That's part of the world that we live in. Now I want to get to the part about what we do every day. Veterinary drug development. Lots of different kinds of drugs, and I'll talk about a little bit about some alternatives to antibiotics. But what I want to say to this audience is, on the whole, the work that we do in veterinary medicine, animal health companies, is several times more pragmatic and difficult than in human medicine, and I'll show you why. Because we not only have to worry about, is it effective against the target pathogen, but we got to worry about, if it gets into the stomach of the 21-year-old high school football player or college football player, does it affect his microflora? Because that's the new world. A lot of stuff going on today that we didn't have to do not that very long ago. So when you look at residues, metabolites, and resistance, it gets really complicated. Now, one of the things that no one is sort of talking about, the sort of sacred cow in the human world that nobody wants to sort of go there, is the drug resistance in the hospitals to the immune-compromised patient. And it's a very big deal. Because there are a lot of folks that need a lot of antibiotics, and their immune system is not working very damn well. And it creates an environment that encourages resistance that they have to manage and figure out in the human system. I have a son that's a PhD, genetic epidemiologist, works in the human field. He works in the diabetic arena. And ladies and gentlemen, it is a world that scares me to death. Because in that sort of world is a whole bunch of obese patients that don't take care of themselves, and they come in and they want drugs to fix their lack of discipline. Tough place to be. I put this up here because every one of those, except for one, wasn't necessary to do to license an antibiotic 10 years ago. So in the last 10 years, there's all these new tests that we have to do because it gets really, really complicated to get a new drug on the market. I won't go into a lot of the information because it's very complicated, except that VICH stands for a trilateral organization between Japan, Europe, and the United States to work together to find harmonization for rules so when you put antibiotics on the market, the world can live with it. Some days, finding harmonization across those three countries is a full-time job because they all have competing interests. Here's some interesting stuff. Testing for effects on human intestinal flora. We are required now for antimicrobial drugs that are ingested to understand the ecology of the intestinal flora pre and post treatment. I didn't have much training in that department when I was in vet school. And as we look at the way we impact the interface between humans and us, we got to keep in mind that it's not very simple. You know, when I grew up, when we butchered chickens, which we did for a living, my mother always cooked the chicken well because she knew if she didn't, there was a price to pay. Some of that training sort of goes unnoticed in some of the new generations today, and the whole idea of cooking until done in some cases sort of is lost in the chaos of you got to take care of me. We're going to move into the stewardship thing because stewardship is a very nebulous term, and there's about 100 people in here, something like that. And each one of us think it's different. There's no consistency in what stewardship means. Is it using antibiotics less often? Is it using the total amount of antibiotics daily? Is it treating only animals that are ill? Is it only using the best antibiotic as a last resort? Stewardship is a very big, complicated picture. I'm going to be provocative, as Lonnie says. In the world of business, and this year I'll celebrate 26 years after practice in the animal health business, and I've seen a bit of change. But in the world of business, there is an eternal conflict. And it doesn't really matter if you're in production or if you're in the animal health business. It's not a good business plan to sell less next year than you did this year. Let me repeat that. It is not a good business plan to sell less next year as you did this year. And the eternal conflict in stewardship forever and ever, and my good friends in this pharmaceutical industry know all too well, it's all about double-digit growth, no matter if the animal population is 20% less than last year. Some of my most entertaining days is a veterinarian with a conscience hanging out with an accountant that needs more sales. I love the job, but it's a conflict. And as this audience sort of sorts it out, please understand that we're going to also have to navigate that sort of ornery bridge. We can do it, but it's not obvious. If you're a scientist, you have a different slant on that demand. I'm going to go back to a perspective because I think it's useful here. As Tony knows, and several of you know in this room, I spent a long time in pseudorabies eradication. One of the happiest days of my life was the celebration that we did in the early 2001, Jim, something like that. Don't remember for sure. 2002. We, as an industry, were celebrating the eradication of pseudorabies. As a veterinarian, it was a huge accomplishment, and it was profoundly energizing. And then my CEO walked up to me, shook my hand, and he said, and Michael, you know Raul, he's not exactly your warm fuzzy. He shook my hand and he said, Rick, hell of a job, but a really bad business model. You know why? 2 years before we eradicated, we had a $20 million pseudorabies business. You know what our business was that year? It was $1.5 million. That's why they think differently than we do. So let's talk about a few things that it relates to livestock production. Are in fact antimicrobials necessary? And if they are they going to be helpful, harmful, or complicated? Yes, I've spent a lot of time in multiple species, and they all have their unique strengths and weaknesses. But here's one that I am reminded of every day. Are cattle predators or prey animals? That's an obvious answer. Even my admin knows the answer to that, and she doesn't have any animal health background. Sure, they're prey animals. So a prey animal, when it's sick, what does it have to do? It has to fake it, thank you. Because if it doesn't, it gets weeded off in the population, and the predators come along and take it away. So here's a good one for you. To date, 8 trials have been done trying to figure out if we accomplished veterinarians can tell a sick calf with respiratory disease from a healthy calf. And the best of the best of the best get it right 65% of the time. So, when you sort of look at that, all 3 of those cattle are infected as they stand there with a bug that's going to kill them if it doesn't get treated. And one of them looks as healthy as the rest of the herd. And then there's the business model that the U.S. has. Unbelievable business model, because from a gram of protein production as it relates to the cost to produce it, nobody in this world is even close to us. The pig boys know it, the poultry boys know it, and girls, sorry for the connotation. In the world protein market, we got it going on, folks. Even with $8 corn and the fight between the ethanol folks. We still produce on a gram per gram basis the highest quality protein in the world, bar none, cheaper than anybody else. But it comes at some risk. It comes at the risk of, how do you enhance consumer trust in that equation? How do we tell the 25-year-old urbanite that's 4 generations removed from the farm, that's feeding 2 kids and making a decision, and her husband makes $100,000 a year, so she's got a lot of disposable income, how do we get her trust in that business equation? She needs to know how good we are in the middle of Amarillo, Texas, raising cattle. We've never done that. We've never had to. Why do you think Whole Foods is sort of growing fast? The demographic that I just told you about is one of the reasons. Those people got a lot of money and they want information and they want trust about that. I love this. I don't know who said it, but I absolutely believe it 100%. If you think we understand microbial resistance, then you haven't listened or been explained to properly. Because it's far more complicated than the chess game you learned at 19 or 15. And there are environmental factors, there are all kinds of factors that aren't that easy to sort of get your head around. Are all exposures equal? All right? I'm now in the cattle business, doesn't matter, I can tell about the pig business as well. We now know that if you get a pot load of 120 4-weight calves and they're delivered into Texas and it's 104 degrees on arrival, there isn't a vaccine out there that that calf will respond to. And it doesn't matter how big the fill is, it doesn't matter how much nutrients they had or how short a truck drive. The immune system in that calf is trying to survive, and they cannot respond to an antigen. And the industry does what? Unloads them and vaccinates them, and then we shake our hands and say, damn, we did a good job. And then if you put antibiotics in the same kind of calf, and it doesn't get to 75 degrees, it stays at 98 degrees for 3 days, what's the chances that that antibiotic's going to do anything? Because the blood turns to sludge. And you can't sort of even push it around the lungs very well. So let's keep in mind that it's complicated. Love this slide. It was sort of shown in a different way from several other people, but the reason I like it is 4 of those antibiotics, as they were introduced to the marketplace, already had resistance. 1 of them was completely synthetic. Linaclid is completely synthetic. And when it was introduced to the human field, in the first month, they had multiple resistance before it was ever out there. Now you can do the math on that one. That wasn't because it was antibiotic pressure with a new antibiotic. It was for some other reason. Okay? I was trying to remember, Tony. When am I supposed to be off of here? I don't want to go over. Do you remember? That's what I thought. All right, let's jump to alternatives to antibiotics because I think some of you want to sort of get your head around that as well. What's the world doing with alternatives to antibiotics? Because I think someone said this is the day of science and what's going on. We've got 5 or 6 potential opportunities that go beyond the traditional antibiotics. And all of the companies have business development and research development projects looking at this. There are things that enhance the immune system of animals so that the vaccines and drugs are working better. That's sort of one category. There are efflux pump reducers so that antibiotics can't develop resistance as fast as they did before. That's another category. There is a category of biofilm disruption. Biofilm is a necessary component to several of the pathogens in order to attack the host and be effective. And if you disrupt the biofilm, you disrupt the ability for the bacteria to cause disease. One of the more exciting ones is virulence factor inhibitors. Every organism has a modality that encourages it to be more virulent or less virulent. And we're beginning to understand what those modalities are, and we're creating interference mechanisms so that those virulence factors are disrupted. There's phage technology. Phage technology is a bit more, Star Wars-like. I don't exactly understand it, but in essence, there are certain bacteria that have phages that they need in order to create disease. I'm going to put virulence factor inhibition up there as probably one of the things that we were talking about. We all know that Mannheimia has a leukotoxin component. That leukotoxin component is one of the virulence factors of Mannheimia. There are others. And we in our research group have been able to take a look at that virulence factor and vaccines that make a difference on managing that virulence factor. We also have a pharma product that specifically targets that leukotoxin. So when you take a look at virulence factors, every bacteria has a different set of virulence factors. I think we've covered this pretty well, but these are the critically, highly, and important. And the only thing that I would say to you is that in cattle, the last 3 new antibiotics were all macrolides. And at the end of the day, our industry worldwide has moved in the direction of macrolides for 2 reasons. Low volume and conveniently able to give at any temperature other than the efficacy. That's okay, but I think all of us in this room recognize that you don't introduce a new class or enhance antibiotic availability in an additional class, you're probably going to have some issues later on. I put this up here because producers see this and they get really nervous. We just heard from NARMS because NARMS is trying to do good work, but our producers that rely on us see these kinds of press releases and they sort of feel like that somebody from the government is going to show up and start doing stuff on their farm that's going to put them out of business. Got to be careful in this dialogue that we don't sort of feed that frenzy. So we're going to get to the summary quickly. over the last 15 years, you have to recognize that the animal health markets are quite a lot smaller than the human markets. Okay? Let me sort of get your head around the big number. Globally, animal health is about a $20 billion business. Globally. Okay? There are at least 6 human drugs all by themselves that have a bigger business than all of animal health. The statins have categories 4, 5, and 6. Okay? So just keep in mind the perspective of the businesses that we're in. And yet, over the last 15 years, the cost of us getting products on the market through this enhanced process has gone up by 150%. We've added 4.5 years to the average timeline. And now, upwards of 35% of the research that we do is defensive in posture. Is it toxic? Does it last in the environment? Does it affect the fish? And the list goes on and on and on. So these are my last 2 slides. And again, I want to sort of keep things into perspective. One of my roles is I'm the lead veterinarian for Merck Animal Health on the food animal issues when the DC craziness sort of runs amok. And I'm supposed to go out and help out. And so I'm sent these kinds of communications on a frequent basis. Antibiotics are considered the crown jewels of modern medicine. They have transformed health by stopping infections since they went into broad use after World War II. But many scientists say that their effectiveness is being eroded by indiscriminate use both to treat infections in people and to encourage growth in chickens, turkeys, cows, and pigs. Anybody know what the readership is for the New York Times, electronically or in paperback these days? Something in the neighborhood of 70 million readers a day. Antibiotic use in people can be closely monitored through the vast infrastructure of the nation's healthcare system. Well, I don't think so. But that's what they said. I think our MD gave us a bit of a hint. They're maybe not as good as that as they said, but it's in print, so it's got to be true. There is no equivalent for animals. Therein lies the sort of caveat that you got to deal with. The single biggest problem we face in infectious disease today is the rapid growth of resistance to antibiotics. Okay, maybe. Some thoughts that I have. Animal agriculture and veterinary medicine will continue to advocate responsible and scientific investigation of antibiotics through advancements in licensing discipline and stewardship of use of current and discovered new products. And believe me, we spend huge amounts of time in my company hanging out trying to figure out how we're going to cross the interface between selling and keeping products active for a long time. Because we're having dialogues now that we didn't have 10 years ago. While development of effective disease prevention is important, veterinarians also need innovative treatments for a wide variety of diseases in pets. I have, as one of my responsibilities, a pharmacovigilance department for all the food animal species. We get 50 calls a week on goats and sheep and how we use our products in an off-label way. And that sort of dynamic is getting bigger and bigger. The R&D provided by research-based pharmaceutical industry is critical to respond to changing conditions. And believe me, R&D loves sort of the opportunity to discover new ways to sort of manage disease. And so there's lots and lots of money being spent in that arena. And I don't think that anybody should misunderstand there's a lot of motivation for new stuff. And finally, balancing natural resources, husbandry practices, performance enhancement, and health management with the global regulatory environment and consumer acceptance is the only way our children are going to enjoy this industry as much as we do.